She thought she was doing her daughter a favor by giving up everything she had. But when betrayal came not from a stranger, but from her own flesh and blood, she was left with nothing but a suitcase and a storm overhead. Alone, heartbroken, and with nowhere to turn, the last person she expected stepped out of the past, with a key that could unlock far more than just a door. What do you do when the man you once cast aside becomes the only one left who truly sees you? Stay with us to find out how it all unfolds. Or better yet, pour yourself a cup of tea, get comfortable, and dive into this unforgettable story. And don't forget to follow for more. The soup was still steaming in the bowl, a rich golden broth flecked with carrots and celery, the kind of meal that should have smelled like comfort. But the air in Lisa's cramped suburban kitchen felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next sharp word to drop. "Lisa, honey, the soup's ready," Margaret called, her voice firm but not unkind. "Put that phone down and set the table. And don't forget to call Tom in, or he'll go telling people I starved him again." Lisa barely looked up from her phone. "He knows it's lunchtime, Mom." Margaret's lips thinned as she reached into the cupboard for the bowls herself. "He's your husband. Least you can do is act like you care if he eats." 2 minutes later, Tom shuffled into the kitchen, shoulders slightly hunched, as though trying to make himself smaller. He offered a polite "afternoon" and sat at the far end of the table. His fingers drummed lightly on the tabletop. Every so often, his eyes darted to the window, following the wind as it swept brown leaves across the lawn. Margaret watched him with suspicion. It wasn't the first time she tried to like Tom. God knew she had tried, at least in her mind. But something about him always rubbed her the wrong way. Too quiet, too mild. A man with no spine didn't deserve her daughter, no matter how good he was with household chores or how steady his paycheck was. Lisa finally put her phone down and ladled soup into bowls. When she set one in front of Tom, he startled slightly, mumbled a thank you, and reached for his spoon. Then, as he pulled his phone from his pocket, maybe to silence a call or check a message, his elbow knocked the edge of the bowl. The soup hit the floor with a wet smack, splashing up the cabinets, the table legs, and his jeans. For a moment, no one moved. Then Margaret's face flushed a deep red. "For crying out loud, are you completely useless?" I'm sorry," Tom stammered, already dropping to his knees to clean it up. "I'll get it. Really, it's fine." "No, it's not fine," Margaret snapped, slapping a roll of paper towels on the table with a thud. "You come into my house, can't sit still for 5 minutes, and now look, all over my kitchen." "It was an accident," Lisa said, her voice half-hearted, already reaching for her phone again. "We can just get another bowl." "Oh sure, just throw another one on the pile. Maybe you'll finally chip in for a new set of dishes," Margaret barked. "But with what? His paycheck? Please. With a man like him, you'll never own anything but trouble." Tom stood, his hands still wet, his face pale. "I didn't mean," he began, but then stopped. What was the point? He set the spoon down gently, as if afraid even that would make noise. Then, without another word, he turned and left the kitchen. Lisa didn't even follow him. "Mom, do you have to be so dramatic every time we visit?" "Dramatic," Margaret scoffed. "I'm the only one in this house trying to keep standards. You think I enjoy spending my Sundays cooking for a man who can't even hold a bowl." Lisa sighed. "He's not that bad. He just doesn't push back." And that's your idea of a husband. Someone who disappears the second things get hard. Margaret slammed the ladle into the sink. "You'll regret it, mark my words." But Lisa didn't answer. She was already texting someone else. Someone new. Tom, meanwhile, sat in the car with the engine running but the heat off. His breath fogged the windshield. He wasn't even mad, just tired. This wasn't the first Sunday lunch that had ended like this, and something told him it wouldn't be the last. Until it was. Because the next morning, while standing in line at the grocery store, Tom got the message. Lisa had filed for divorce. No explanation. Just a sterile note from her lawyer and a time-stamped email with the subject line, "Next Steps." And that was it. The house, the weekend trips to her mother's, the long silences that filled their evenings, gone just like that. And he didn't even cry. He just felt like someone had unplugged a vacuum. He didn't know it then, but it was the first day he could breathe. It started with a draft in the hallway. Margaret had always known the farmhouse outside Akron had its quirks, the creaky floorboards, the single bathroom with a faucet that sputtered when you turned it too fast, the way the windows breathed with the wind, but it was hers. Every corner, every nail in the wall, every scratch in the hardwood had a memory tucked inside it. She'd lived alone there since her husband passed, kept the place going with grit and routine. The barn needed paint. The garden had grown wild. But the soup still simmered on her stove every evening, and the radio still played her favorite big band station on Sunday mornings. It was quiet, yes, but it was hers. Until Lisa started dropping hints. At first, it was the usual. "That drive is too long, Mom." Then it became, "You shouldn't be living out there alone. What if something happens?" Soon it turned into, "My place is warmer in the winter, and I've got a spare room." We could look after each other. Margaret had raised Lisa to be strong, independent, maybe a little sharp-tongued, but she also remembered the girl who used to braid her hair on the porch, who ran barefoot through the cornrows in the summer, who once cried because her goldfish died. So when Lisa sat at the kitchen table one October morning, her nails perfectly manicured and her coffee cooling untouched beside her, Margaret was caught off guard. "Mom," Lisa said, "you really should think about moving in with me. This house, it's just too much for you now." Margaret wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Too much. I've managed just fine." "You managed last year. This year, the furnace is older than I am. You said it made a sound like a dying animal. And what happens if you slip on the ice again? There's no one here to help you." "I didn't slip. I stumbled," Margaret muttered. Lisa leaned in. "Come on, Mom. You've got that little nest egg from Dad's insurance. You sell this place, put your feet up for once, and just let me take care of things. Isn't that what family does?" Margaret frowned. The idea of leaving her home made her stomach twist, but Lisa's words, smooth and warm, began to settle like silt. The winters were getting colder. Her knees ached more with each passing season. The barn was sagging, and Lisa did sound sincere. So Margaret relented, telling herself it was just until things got easier. By Thanksgiving, the farmhouse was listed. 2 weeks before Christmas, it was gone. The check, fat and final, was handed over to Lisa with a signature and a handshake. "It's easier," Lisa insisted. "I'll handle the finances. You just focus on getting settled." The first few weeks in Lisa's suburban condo weren't unbearable. Margaret unpacked slowly. She tried to ignore the fact that Lisa worked late most nights or left early with a vague meeting with the team. She cooked, cleaned, did laundry. She never said it aloud, but she expected to feel appreciated. Instead, she felt invisible. There were no more shared cups of coffee, no late-night movies, no real conversation. Lisa's apartment, with its minimalist furniture and sterile white walls, was a far cry from the home Margaret had left behind. Her daughter breezed in and out like a tenant, and Margaret became the unpaid housekeeper, folding fitted sheets and wondering if she made the biggest mistake of her life. Then one night, Lisa came home with a look Margaret hadn't seen in years. Her face was glowing, her cheeks flushed. She looked younger, hopeful. "Mom," she said, letting her purse drop with a soft thud onto the entryway bench. "I met someone." Margaret arched an eyebrow. "Someone?" "Oleg," Lisa said, sighing like a teenager. "He's incredible. Confident. Successful. He actually listens when I talk. I don't have to explain myself. It just works." Margaret didn't respond at first. She kept folding the dish towel in her lap. "He's from Austin," Lisa went on, her smile widening. "But he's thinking about relocating. We've been talking about making a fresh start. Somewhere warmer." "Warmer than Ohio?" Margaret asked dryly. "So, what, Florida?" "Maybe Tennessee," Lisa said with a shrug. "We'll see." Margaret's chest tightened. "And what about this place?" Lisa stood up, her eyes flicking toward the hallway. "We'll figure that out. I'm not asking you to move again. Just don't worry, okay?" The next week, the realtors started showing up. Men in suits, clipboards in hand. They walked through the apartment without acknowledging Margaret, opening closets, checking outlets, measuring rooms. One of them even asked if the tenant would be out by the time escrow closed. It was only then Margaret realized the truth. She wasn't being looked after. She was being cleared out. The confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Lisa was packing a suitcase. There was a buzz in her voice that made Margaret's skin crawl. "You're selling," Margaret said. Lisa paused, one hand resting on a stack of folded tops. "Yes. Already sold, actually. Quick close. Oleg and I are leaving this weekend." Margaret stared. "Where do you expect me to go?" Lisa didn't meet her eyes. "I don't know. Back to Akron, maybe. I'm sorry, Mom, but I have my own life to live. You're not helpless. You'll figure something out." Margaret felt like the floor had fallen out beneath her. "Lisa, I gave you everything from the sale of my home. I trusted you." "You gave it to help us both," Lisa said coolly. "It wasn't some contract. Look, I'm sorry this is sudden, but Oleg and we need to build something together. You understand, don't you?" Margaret didn't answer. She packed a single bag. She put on her coat. She left with nothing but a bus schedule in one hand and the burning sting of betrayal in the other. She didn't know where she'd sleep. She didn't know what came next. She just knew she was no longer welcome in the only place she thought she had left. It started to rain around dusk. Not a gentle drizzle, but a sharp, needling rain that slapped against the sidewalk and seeped into seams, into skin, into bones. Margaret stood under the narrow awning of a shuttered pharmacy on Monroe Street, hugging her coat tighter across her chest. Her suitcase, one of those cheap roll-in ones with a crooked wheel, sat beside her like an unwanted pet. She had walked for hours with nowhere to go. Every shelter she called was full. The friend she thought she might reach out to hadn't spoken to her in years. She let those bridges rot while she tended to her marriage, then to widowhood, then to Lisa. And Lisa, well, Margaret couldn't even say her name aloud. Not yet. Not without crying. Her hands trembled from cold and fatigue. She hadn't eaten since a stale bagel at sunrise, and her legs ached with a dull, pulsing pain that only comes from standing too long at an age when joints rebel. She checked her phone again. 10% battery. No missed calls. Of course not. She was invisible now. Just after 7, her vision began to blur, not from tears this time, but from something deeper. A fog creeping into her mind. She tried to steady herself against the brick wall, but her knees buckled. The world tilted sideways. Her heart thumped too fast, then skipped, then slammed again like a fist on a door. She clutched at her chest, mouth opening in a silent plea, and crumpled to the ground, cheek pressed to the wet concrete. That's how the paramedics found her, half conscious, soaking wet, and clutching a suitcase like it held her last shred of dignity. They moved quickly, wrapping her in a thermal blanket, asking questions she couldn't answer. Name, age, emergency contact. She mumbled Lisa's name, but no one came. At the hospital, the fluorescent lights felt blinding. Nurses fussed around her like bees, drawing blood, checking vitals, hooking her up to machines that beeped and blinked without mercy. When they asked if there was someone to notify, she shook her head. It was easier than explaining the truth. Later, a doctor with kind eyes and a gentle voice told her she'd suffered a mild cardiac episode brought on by exhaustion and exposure. She needed rest. Warmth. And maybe, he added with an apologetic smile, someone in your corner. Margaret didn't reply. She just turned her face to the wall and waited for sleep to come. The hospital ward was quiet in the early mornings, eerily so. Just the soft squeak of nurse shoes on linoleum and the occasional groan from an IV pole being wheeled across the hallway. Margaret spent the next few days in a fog, drifting in and out of restless sleep, waking only to eat tasteless meals or shuffle to the bathroom with the help of a nurse. No one visited. No one called. And she didn't expect them to. She told herself she was strong, a survivor, someone who didn't need anyone. But lying in that two-white room with her name taped to the end of a bed and nothing but a plastic cup of water on her tray, she felt smaller than she had since she was a child. On the fourth morning, she wandered into the hallway, drawn by the faint scent of coffee and the need to stretch her legs. Her robe hung awkwardly around her frame, and the slippers the hospital had given her were 2 sizes too big. She shuffled past closed doors and faded bulletin boards, pausing now and then to catch her breath. And that's when she saw him. Tom. He was standing just outside room 213, his back to her. A soft green sweater hugged his shoulders, and his hands held a paper cup of coffee and a small white bag from the hospital cafeteria. Margaret froze. Her mind scrambled to make sense of what she was seeing. Was it him? Had she imagined it? He turned, and the confirmation hit her like a jolt. Tom. Her ex-son-in-law. The man she had called spineless, useless, weak. He looked good. Healthier than she remembered. Softer around the eyes, but still steady. He glanced at her, surprised. Margaret? His voice was calm, quiet, not angry, not cold, just surprised. She swallowed. Her throat was suddenly dry. Tom, she said, barely above a whisper. He stepped toward her without hesitation. Are you okay? You're in here. She nodded slowly. Just a little heart scare. Nothing dramatic. Tom didn't laugh. He didn't gloat. He just nodded, taking it in. How long have you been here? He asked. A few days. I don't really know. It all kind of blurred together. He shifted the coffee cup to his other hand. Do you need anything? A charger? Some real food? Margaret's eyes stung, but she didn't let the tears fall. No, I'm fine. Just walking. He hesitated, then gestured toward the room behind him. My wife's mom is here. Heart stuff, too. I come in the mornings before work. Margaret blinked. You're married again. He smiled gently. Yeah, her name's Nadine. She's good. We're good. Behind him, a soft voice called out, Tom, honey, can you bring me that pillow again? Tom turned back. Be right there. Then to Margaret. It was good to see you. Really. I hope you're okay. She nodded, numb. You too. He stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind him. Margaret stood in the hallway, still for what felt like a lifetime. Through the door, she heard soft laughter, his voice, another woman's. Then silence again. She walked back to her room, hands shaking, heart heavier than it had been even the night Lisa shut the door in her face. Because for the first time, she saw clearly. Tom hadn't been the weak one. He had just needed someone who wanted him, not someone who tolerated him. And Lisa. Lisa had tossed gold in the trash and walked away. Margaret lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling, and let the shame roll over her like waves. Not for what Lisa had done, but for all the years she'd helped her do it. The next morning, Margaret lingered longer than usual in the hallway, making slow laps with no real destination. The doctor had said walking would help with circulation, but she wasn't doing it for that. Not really. She was waiting, though she couldn't admit it to herself, for a glimpse of Tom again. At first, she told herself it was curiosity or guilt. But deep down, it was something heavier, something raw. She needed to see that what she'd witnessed yesterday wasn't some kind of dream. Tom, caring, warm, present. The very things she once insisted he wasn't. She spotted him again just past 8. Same time, same soft sweater. This time he had a thermos and a plastic container filled with what looked like cut fruit. His steps were unhurried, steady, the kind of walk of someone who had nothing to prove. Margaret ducked behind the corner of the nurse's station, unsure why she was hiding. "You spying on him now?" came a voice to her right. She turned. A woman, maybe mid-60s, stood beside her in a robe with tiny embroidered birds on the collar. Short gray hair, neatly combed. Her eyes twinkled with amusement, but softened with understanding. Margaret managed a half smile. No, just walking. The woman nodded, clearly not believing a word. "You know Tom." Margaret hesitated. "I used to. He was my son-in-law. My daughter and he, well, they didn't work out." "Oh," the woman said, surprised. "Small world. I'm Nadine's mother. Name's Helen." The two women stood in silence for a beat. Then Helen added, "He's something, isn't he?" Margaret swallowed hard. "Yes, he really is." Helen laughed softly. "You wouldn't believe how many times I told my daughter she hit the jackpot. He does everything. Fixes things without being asked. Never raises his voice. And the way he dotes on those twins. It's like he's trying to win a Dad of the Year contest every day." "Twins?" Margaret echoed. Helen nodded proudly. 2 little boys. 4 years old, spitting image of him. Sweetest kids you ever met. Nadine had a rough pregnancy. Bed rest for months. Tom carried the whole house on his back. Never once complained. Still doesn't. Margaret turned her face slightly, pretending to look at the nurse's chart on the wall. She didn't want Helen to see the sting in her eyes, or the guilt that clamped around her throat. "Must be nice," she murmured. Helen looked at her. "He talks about his ex sometimes. Not in a nasty way, just quiet. Like someone remembering a bad winter. Says she was smart. Driven, but she never wanted what he wanted. Family. Roots. He needed to grow. She needed to run." Margaret closed her eyes for a second. That summed up Lisa better than she ever could. "I used to think he was too soft," Margaret admitted, her voice a low hush. "I thought being loud meant being strong. I pushed him away before I even tried to know him." Helen didn't judge. She simply said, "Funny thing about life. It makes us watch the replay whether we want to or not." They walked in silence for a bit. Down the corridor. Back again. Over the next few days, Margaret and Helen formed a quiet friendship. They had breakfast together in the communal lounge, laughed softly about the way the nurse with the bright pink scrubs always messed up the TV remote. They shared stories from when gas was 30 cents a gallon and Elvis was more than a Halloween costume. Margaret hadn't connected with another woman like that in years. She avoided Tom, at first out of shame, then out of caution. But he was everywhere, like kindness in motion, carrying a fresh pair of socks for Helen, bringing her a crossword puzzle, waiting patiently while she sipped water between pills. He never looked stressed. He never rushed her. And once, when he helped an old man back into his wheelchair after a fall, Margaret saw him place a hand on the man's shoulder and whisper, "You're all right. I got you." She could hardly bear to watch. She'd once called that man inadequate. Now she watched strangers lean into him like he was a lighthouse. Then one afternoon, Helen turned to her and said, "I think you should talk to him." Margaret shook her head. What would I even say? Helen sipped her tea. Start with, "I'm sorry." Then just listen. The man's got more grace in him than most pastors I've met. That evening, after dinner, Margaret saw him alone by the vending machine. She nearly walked past, nearly chickened out. But something stopped her. "Tom," she said, voice cautious. He turned, a small bag of trail mix in one hand. "Margaret." I've been meaning to talk to you," she began, but I didn't know how. He gave a small smile. "There's no right way." "I was awful to you," she said, the words tumbling out. "You were kind and patient, and I treated you like you didn't matter. I blamed you for everything Lisa did." He looked down at the bag, then back at her. "You were protecting your daughter. I get it." "No," she said firmly. "I wasn't protecting her. I was just angry, and proud, and wrong." Tom didn't say anything. He just nodded, eyes soft. Margaret's voice cracked. "I see you now. I mean, really see you. And I don't know how I missed it before. You were the kind of man people pray ends up with their daughter." Tom chuckled quietly. Not everyone would agree. "I do," she whispered. "I do now." There was a long pause. Not awkward, just full. Then Tom said, "Everyone has blind spots, Margaret. What matters is what we do after we notice them." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "You're a better man than I ever gave you credit for." Tom reached out, gently touched her arm. "And you're braver than you think." They didn't speak more that night. But for the first time in years, Margaret went to bed with a little less weight on her chest. The walls of the hospital weren't warm. The sheets were still scratchy. But somehow she didn't feel quite so cold anymore. The morning of her discharge arrived with frost on the windows and a silence that felt heavier than usual. The nurse helped Margaret gather her few belongings: an extra pair of socks, a paperback book she hadn't finished, the cracked reading glasses she still hadn't replaced. Everything she owned now fit into a single hospital-issued plastic bag. She looked down at her coat. Thin, outdated, the lining coming apart at the seams. It wasn't meant for an Ohio winter. It hadn't been meant for much of anything for a long time. She slipped it on anyway and tucked her scarf close to her neck, as if that could keep out more than just the cold. Outside, a wind had picked up, snapping the last of the golden leaves from the trees. Margaret sat on a bench near the hospital entrance, a small suitcase at her feet. The nurse had offered to call a cab, but she declined. Where would she tell the driver to go? She didn't even have bus fare. Margaret sat in silence, watching her breath fog in front of her, letting the ache in her chest pulse without resistance. She wasn't sure if it was the cold or the truth sinking in. Maybe both. She had nowhere to go, and no one left to ask. She thought briefly of calling Lisa, but that was a fool's thought. Lisa had made her choice. She'd left the way some people close a chapter in a book. They never looked back to reread what hurt. Margaret blinked hard to keep the tears from falling. Then a familiar hum, soft at first, then unmistakable. The slow crunch of tires against gravel. A car pulling into the circular driveway in front of the hospital. She didn't turn around at first. But then a door slammed, and that voice, calm and unshaken, cut through the wind like a steady flame. "Margaret." She looked up. Tom stood by the open passenger door of his car, one hand outstretched, the other tucked in his coat pocket. His hair was mussed from the wind, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. But his smile, small, unassuming, held something stronger than pity. It held welcome. "I figured I might be late," he said, gesturing toward the sky. "Weather's turning." Margaret's throat tightened. What are you doing here?" "I came to give you a ride," he said gently. "It's too cold to be waiting out here. You ready?" She stared at him for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying her silence between them. And then, without a word, she stood, lifted her bag, and followed him to the car. The heat inside was a small mercy. Tom reached over and adjusted the vents toward her without asking. She didn't speak. She didn't have the words. The engine hummed, and soon they were off, the city behind them fading into the gray distance. Margaret looked at the signs as they drove, familiar names. Towns she hadn't seen in years. Fields that once held pumpkins and hay bales now lay quiet under early frost. Then she saw it, an old green mile marker with a name she thought she'd never hear again. Hartville. Her heart thudded once. "You're taking me back," she whispered. Tom kept his eyes on the road. "I figured it was time." "But the house, it's gone, Tom." "I sold it." He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a simple manila folder. "Not anymore." She blinked at him. "I bought it back," he said, "with some money I got from the settlement. I figured someone ought to bring it home." She opened the folder with shaking hands. Deed papers. Her name. The address. Her old address. "Why would you do this?" she asked, voice cracking like old ice. He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Because sometimes the people who didn't choose you still deserve a place to rest." Margaret turned her face toward the window, tears finally falling, silent, grateful, stunned. The house hadn't changed much. The shutters still needed paint. The mailbox still leaned slightly to the left. But it stood. Her house. Her life. Somehow restored. Tom helped her out of the car, carrying her suitcase to the front steps. He handed her the keys, pressed gently into her palm like a sacred object. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just live well, Margaret. Grow your tomatoes. Curse at the radio. You've got time." She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "You were a good man," she said. "Always were. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." He gave her a small smile. "Doesn't matter. You said it." Margaret nodded, and Tom stepped back. He didn't linger, didn't ask to come in, just gave her a quiet wave and got into his car. The engine purred, then faded into the distance, leaving only the crunch of gravel and the rush of the wind. Margaret turned the key. The door creaked open like an old friend waking from a long nap. The air smelled of wood and dust and memory. She stepped inside. It wasn't warm yet, but it would be. Weeks passed. Slowly, gently, she came back to herself. She cleaned the kitchen, fixed what she could. Hung new curtains. Put coffee on the stove every morning. The first time she heard a cardinal outside the window, she smiled so wide it hurt. She planted onions in the garden again. Started walking to the market on Tuesdays. Even joined the library's weekly book club, not to talk, but just to listen. And then, one late summer afternoon, just as the wind began to shift again, there was a knock at the door. Margaret opened it and nearly dropped the bowl of peeled apples in her hands. Lisa stood there, thinner than she remembered, pale, eyes rimmed in exhaustion. "Mom," she whispered. "Hi." Margaret said nothing at first, just took her in. The suitcase at her feet, the way her shoulders curled inward, a woman undone. "Oleg left," Lisa said, her voice trembling. He took everything. "I've got nowhere to go. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But if there's even a corner I can sleep in for a while." Margaret looked at her, not as a mother watching her child fall, not as a woman who'd been betrayed, but as someone who'd learned, finally, what it meant to forgive. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said softly. "I just put a pie in the oven, and we've got catching up to do." Lisa burst into tears. Margaret held her. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon, and for the first time in a long, long time, the house felt like home again.